We have with us Dr. Everton Maraldi, chair of this symposium, who will present The Missing Link, Parapsychology and the Study of Religion and Spirituality, where he will review and critically discuss the variety of perspectives embraced by parapsychologists over time concerning religion and spirituality. Dr. Maraldi is an associate professor at the Pontifical Catholic University of São Paulo. He is also a member of the PA Board of Directors and a regular member of the International Association for the Psychology of Religion. Let us begin the presentation.
In this presentation, I review and critically discuss the variety of perspectives embraced by parapsychologists concerning religion and spirituality. I also point out their implications for research on psi phenomena, as well as for the interdisciplinary dialogue with scholars interested in the study of religious experiences. Finally, I provide a brief review of existing findings concerning the relationship between psi and variables related to religiosity and spirituality. This presentation is based partially on my new book, Parapsychology and Religion, which explores how parapsychological findings may inform research on religious and spiritual experiences, especially in the field of the psychology of religion. Before moving on, it is important to explain what I understand by religion, religiosity, and spirituality. Although the meaning of the word religion might seem obvious to most people, the definition of religion is actually a long-standing, controversial problem in the field of religious studies. Also controversial is the definition of concepts such as sacred, divine, and supernatural. For the purposes of this presentation, I will neglect for a moment the more nuanced aspects of this terminological discussion. I define religiosity here simply as the subjective aspect of religion, that is, the specific way of an individual to experience his/her religious faith. The term religion, in its turn, is used to describe the more institutional and collective aspects of religion, including doctrines, practices, rituals, and sacred objects. However, I may occasionally use religion and religiosity interchangeably. The relationship between religiosity and spirituality is complex and still unresolved. Some authors suggest that spirituality may or may not include a religious dimension, while others affirm that spirituality is a contemporary individual alternative to religion. For my part, I see spirituality and religiosity as profoundly interconnected, even sometimes as indistinguishable concepts. Spirituality probably tells us more about certain transformations and expressions of contemporary religiosity, particularly in Western societies, than it points to a different, clearly identifiable phenomenon. This brings us to James' definition of religion as the feelings, acts, and experiences of individual men in their solitude, so far as they apprehend themselves to stand in relation to whatever they may consider the divine. This seems more like a description of what we should call today as spirituality. In my view, psychic experiences can be considered spiritual experiences, depending on how they are specifically appraised. In fact, many studies reviewed indicate that paranormal experiences comprise a fundamental aspect of spirituality. It is widely accepted that some of the fundamental teachings of religions and spiritual traditions are based or inspired on psychic experiences reported by their founders and practitioners, from prophetic dreams to reports of anomalous cures. In this sense, many parapsychologists have explicitly stated that their research bears implications for the definition and understanding of spirituality. One can also hardly deny the influence, even if only implicit, of different religious traditions over the history of parapsychology, including Christianism, spiritualism, Eastern mysticism, shamanistic practices, esoteric and psychedelic religions. On the part of theologians and other religious studies scholars, many have also recognized the profound interconnection between parapsychology and the study of religion. Given such profound historical connections between parapsychology and religion, one would expect a more thorough dialogue between these two research areas. Notwithstanding, the topic has been poorly explored and does not feature as a prominent aspect of contemporary research in parapsychology. Some parapsychologists might see such topics as problematic, perhaps because of criticisms raised by skeptics that parapsychology is a spiritual movement rather than a science. Many critics, including the Argentine-Canadian philosopher and physicist Mario Bunge and psychologist James Alcock, have suggested that parapsychology is a form of religion or a surrogate of religion. I argue, however, that parapsychology cannot be simplistically stereotyped as a religion disguised as science. Instead of unifying all religions in a superordinated, rational system of thought, as often attempted by New Age spirituality, parapsychology may in fact boost disbelief and skepticism, even if unintended. Parapsychology is a daring frontier endeavor designed to submit religious and other exceptional claims to scientific scrutiny, which means such claims can be contradicted. In this sense, parapsychology is both a product of and a response to the disenchantment of the world. Historically, parapsychology can be defined as a child of secularization. For some, it is the announcer of a secular or postmodern spirituality. Some authors think that if the findings of parapsychology are reliable and confirm that certain religious phenomena are genuine, then parapsychology may help us understand the origins of religions. And this is quite true. However, things are a bit more complicated than this. Parapsychological findings may or may not benefit a spiritual interpretation. Parapsychology may actually serve to foster naturalist, though controversial, explanations of psychic experiences. For example, many authors have suggested that these experiences are subjected to biological evolution, much in the same way as other neurophysiological and psychological processes. Others, like Stephen Broad, have suggested that psychic functioning is best explained by psychoanalytic and secular humanist perspectives, rather than divine intervention. Even when findings are apparently congruent with a non-materialist perspective, they may partially contradict established beliefs, as exemplified by investigations of children who claim to remember previous lives. The patterns and characteristics of alleged past life memories have sometimes contested traditional beliefs about reincarnation, such as the idea of karma. Similarly, some researchers have questioned the existence of an afterlife by arguing that psychic functioning is sufficient to explain apparent spirit communication. These examples show that the relationship between parapsychology and religion can be more ambiguous than usually assumed. We also need to ask whether parapsychology can really demonstrate or refute, on a fundamental level, the claims of religions. Some of the fundamental tenets of religions, such as the omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence of God, might be beyond any possible scientific understanding, even if we adopt a different research paradigm, more open to non-materialist or post-materialist assumptions. In contrast to those who see parapsychology as a religion, the evidence shows that parapsychologists' conceptions of religion and spirituality varies considerably. In a survey with members of the Parapsychological Association carried out almost 2 decades ago. Tart has found that 49% of respondents answered that spirituality was not an important motivation to enter the field, while 45% answered that it was completely or partly important. A remaining 6% were unclear. Moreover, only one-third answered that their work in parapsychology is inspired by spiritual motivations, while 26% reported some conflict between their spirituality and experimental research in parapsychology. These figures seem to indicate that spirituality was a common, but far from dominant, reason for becoming a parapsychologist. Nonetheless, Tart acknowledges that he did not define spiritual, and many participants complained about the lack of explanation for that term. Given the strong criticism often suffered by parapsychologists, some respondents might have answered the questions in a socially desirable way, thus avoiding any connection with things spiritual. In any case, these findings illustrate how diverse parapsychologists may be in their spiritual or non-spiritual motivations and interests, what bear implications for the relationship between parapsychology and religion spirituality. Since the old days of psychical research, parapsychologists manifest a variety of backgrounds and perspectives on the existence and modus operandi of psychical phenomena. However, their opinions also changed over time, giving rise to different approaches to the relationship between parapsychology and religion. I have identified at least 5 major models of religion and spirituality endorsed by parapsychologists. Although these models may sometimes overlap, I will provide a separate description of each of them for didactical and classification purposes. The first one is the spiritual revolution model, first elaborated by Frederick Myers. According to this model, parapsychology has a spiritual duty to reunite science and religion in a great synthesis. Myers explains that the evidence provided by religions is not adequate as standing alone to justify conviction, and priests have thought it safest to defend their own traditions, their own intuitions, without going afield in search of independent evidence of a spiritual world. In this context, the chief purpose of psychical research is to prove the preamble of all religions, that is, that a spiritual world exists. Once the existence of this world is demonstrated, the theologian can reason on that world or feel towards it as he will. Thus, for Myers, the scientific purposes of psychical research were inseparable from their spiritual and moral purposes. The aim of this science was ultimately to correct religion, not destroy it. Psychical research is thus defined as a wider science of which religion is the subjective aspect. Myers continues to be relatively influential among parapsychologists, and his legacy has rendered several articles and books surveying his contributions. More recently, Balash and Tart have argued that parapsychological findings place some challenge to the mainstream materialist paradigm, thus helping bring science and spirituality together. This is precisely what Myers had in mind when he prophesied that the coming century's leaders of spiritual thought would reunite science and religion. The second model I have identified is the Illuminist positivistic model, mainly represented by Charles Richet. Richet saw the history of psychic phenomena as following an almost linear developmental process from mythical and religious stages to a more scientific approach. He describes the mythical stage, which covers a broad period spanning the beginnings of humanity to mesmerism in the 18th century Europe, as an immeasurable period of credulity and ignorance, with only a few facts worthy of attention. This model sees the scientific and experimental approach initiated by William Crookes as a step forward in the understanding of psychic phenomena. The transition from an era of irrationality to a new era of rationality and systematization, which places religion in the past. It is similar to Meyer's model in its critique of religion, but differs from it in the importance attached to spiritual revolution. Although Richet's model is far from being hegemonic today, some authors still rely on a similar developmental approach to describe the history of ideas about psi phenomena, as did Redding in describing the transition from magical and religious traditions to modern and scientific paradigms. The third model of the relationship between religion, spirituality, and parapsychology is the agnostic naturalistic model, of which the Swiss psychologist and psychical researcher Theodore Flournoy is probably the main representative. Flournoy would be better defined today as an advocate of methodological agnosticism, and was cautious about considering evidence for psychic phenomena as necessary proofs of the veracity of religious beliefs. Flournoy had postulated the principle of the exclusion of the transcendent, according to which psychologists should limit their investigations to the psychological factors involved in religious experiences, without asking themselves about the veracity of the feeling of a divine presence described by the experiencer. For him, religious experiences are ultimately rooted in our biology, and their study can shed light on the nature of the human mind, regardless of their theological and mystical implications. Flournoy sought to establish a clear delimitation between psychology and metaphysics, while at the same time maintaining a serious interest in the study of claims of exceptional phenomena, as exemplified by his investigations of mediums. Flournoy was skeptical about spirit communication. Nevertheless, he considered that the medium Alan Smith, whose spiritual experiences he analyzed in detail, evidenced some telepathy and psychokinesis. A similar agnostic naturalistic view is also held by many contemporary parapsychologists. Nevertheless, it should be added that Flournoy considered himself a spiritualist. In his own words, "We must not confound Spiritism, which is a pretended scientific explanation of certain facts by the intervention of spirits of the dead, with spiritualism, which is a religio-philosophical belief opposed to materialism and based on the principle of value and the reality of individual consciousness, and which I conceive to be a necessary postulate for a wholesome conception of the moral life. So far as I myself am concerned, I am a convinced spiritualist." The fourth model is the pluralistic perspective of William James. James was open to the many explanatory possibilities for psychic phenomena. According to psychologist Gardner Murphy, James was raised in a very pluralistic, free-thinking mindset where, according to Gardner, one did not laugh at the claims of Swedenborg. One studied them, played with them, tossed them about, rejected some aspects of them, took other aspects more seriously, just as one did with regard to Christian Science, or any of the other new winds of doctrine that swept through the intellectual atmosphere. As explains Knapp concerning James, his purpose then was neither to advance a religious cause nor to undermine one, but rather to understand and hypostasize psychic phenomena. In his Varieties of Religious Experience, James discussed reports of apparitional experiences extracted from psychical research publications, all along with ecstatic, mystical, or devotional experiences, extracted from more religious literature. For him, these different experiences all seem to reveal the existence in our mental machinery of a sense of present reality more diffused than that which our special senses yield. Rather than emphasizing the boundaries between these matters and their underlying research fields, James explored their interconnections. This open-minded perspective is still espoused by some psychologists of religion including Professor Halfhood, who will share his ideas with us today. The fourth model I have identified is the pragmatic model of G.B. Rhine. Rhine was also very interested in the spiritual implications of parapsychology, but was more moderate than Myers and refrained from developing a whole spiritual program, despite believing that the findings of parapsychology supported the notion that the human being has a non-physical aspect. Rhine saw parapsychology as a wider field of which the relationship with religion was very important, but not central. He introduced a specific branch for that purpose, the parapsychology of religion. Rhine saw the creation of the subfield as a profitable way of parapsychologists to obtain funding for research. Rhine believed that such an exchange would be interesting to religious believers and theologians as well. He saw the situation of religions in the Western world as critical, with increasing levels of disaffiliation and the loss of authority to science. Rhine thought that parapsychology could help religions regain receptivity. He remembered the role played by the spiritualist movement at the beginning of psychical research, and acknowledged the fact that the first general theories of parapsychological phenomena were religious in character. However, parapsychology had led her to withdraw from the very spiritualist association that had helped to generate it in order to follow a scholarly path. Whereas Myers used expressions such as infinite intelligence, cosmic law, ultimate energy, and even spoke of God and discarnate spirits, apparently taking for granted their existence, Rhine stated that the claims of mediumship have never reached the point of justifiable scientific decision, and suggested that God might be a psychological projection, a personalization of psychic abilities. However, he did not completely neglect the possibility of a personal universe to which human beings could turn for help during difficult moments. Religions may either accept and use the new knowledge provided by parapsychology or wait until the need is better indicated. Rhine's approach was essentially pragmatic, despite his deep existential concerns regarding the nature of man and the universe. More recently, some authors have also endorsed transpersonal and culturally sensitive models based on the dialogue with shamanistic indigenous practices or traditions. These different models coexist today and have a significant impact on how parapsychologists develop their studies and theorize about psi. In this sense, it would be important to discuss the limitations and possibilities of such models. For example, the defendants of the spiritual revolution model have usually argued in favor of a unified perspective of religion and science, usually based on a universalist or integrative view of religious beliefs. But the enterprise of reuniting different religions in a single worldview may not be accepted by religious believers, and not only because of their presumed dogmatism or fundamentalism. These proposals of an integrative synthesis fail to acknowledge the complexity of religious worldviews and the many differences between them, as well as the many levels and expressions of religiosity. They also apparently dismiss the many ethical and cultural implications of such a project, or approach them only superficially. The simplistic view of religion derives in part from the lack of dialogue with areas such as psychology of religion and religious studies. The Illuminist positivistic model, in its turn, is based on the notion that religious perspectives about psi are a thing of the past. Although Richer recognized that theologians and religious thinkers of centuries ago have sometimes antedated modern parapsychological conceptions, he tended to think of the relationship between science and religion as a hierarchical relationship rather than a horizontal dialogue. But regardless of the conclusion of this debate between the existing models, there might still be room for a reconciliation between parapsychology and religion. The history of religions shows us that they eventually learned to recognize the contributions of science, and even found ways to incorporate scientific findings into their own activities and theological conceptions. Parapsychologists should not only acknowledge the contributions of religious traditions, but also learn to accept the methodological limitations of parapsychology in evaluating certain religious assumptions. I defend here a transdisciplinary dialogue, a combination of the virtues of Western Enlightenment thinking with its disciplined examination of evidence, and a more expansive and all-embracing worldview that allows for seemingly impossible things, following the work of Bowie. Parapsychology cannot simply prove that religions are true, but parapsychology does seem to show that there are more to religious experience than just cognitive biases and social and psychodynamic motivations. Parapsychology exists in the first place because people in different cultures report psychic events. Thus, investigations must continue, and their philosophical, and why not theological and religious implications should be thoroughly discussed following an open and informed perspective. The fact is that few studies have actually investigated the relationship between psi and religious or spiritual variables. Further investigation in this direction could certainly help answer the question of whether psi is fundamentally related to religiosity and spirituality or only partially connected to them. A few investigations have explored the correlation between psi performance and variables such as self-reported religiosity and religious beliefs. In this direction, Nash found that ESP scores were positively and significantly correlated with an original measure of religious values. In a series of 8 ESP experiments, Haraldson used 3 original measures of religiosity. He found that both the combined measure of religiosity and belief in the afterlife significantly correlated with ESP scores in 2 of the experiments and for all the experiments combined. Religiosity showed to be a better correlate of ESP when compared with belief in psychic ability, since psychic belief evidenced more contradictory findings and non-significant results. These are interesting findings in view of studies showing that belief in psychic ability, not necessarily the person's own psychic abilities, but psychic ability in general, is an important predictor of psi. The studies of Nash and Haraldson indicate that religiosity rather than belief in psychic ability is a good predictor of psi. Interestingly, this was not further explored despite some evidence suggesting that taking participants' religiosity into consideration and adapting the experiment to address their beliefs might enhance psi performance, as suggested by some studies by Patrick Geisler. It is recommended that parapsychologists use standard measures of religiosity, spirituality, and mysticism already employed by psychologists of religion. Constructs such as religious development, intrinsic and extrinsic religiosity, attachment to God, and daily spiritual experiences could be investigated in relation to psi performance in different experiments. It would also be of relevance to compare religious and non-religious participants, as well as individuals with different levels of religious involvement, from leaders to followers. This would eventually help parapsychologists find novel correlates for psi and identify significant relations between their experimental findings and everyday experiences and practices. Religious groups may eventually help researchers identify participants that seem to be more predisposed to obtain better hit rates. It is recommended that researchers develop their research protocols in collaboration with members of the religious groups under investigation and adjust the design to approximate the conditions expected for the phenomenon to occur, without losing sight of experimental controls and data reliability. Psi experiments have typically obtained small effect sizes. Part of this problem derives from the fact that experimental conditions may lack ecological validity. It is widely recognized in parapsychology that anecdotal reports of psi in everyday life are usually much more intense and impactful. If this is considered by some to be evidence that such narratives are exaggerated and does not indicate veridical events, it is also possible that parapsychological experiments are failing to reproduce the necessary conditions for psi to manifest in its fullness. Could the dialogue between parapsychology, religion, and spirituality help improve ecological validity in relation to experiments involving religious variables, practices, and groups? This is a question worth considering in future investigations. Reports of psychic events come in different shades, from the more prosaic to the exceptional. In many instances, they have not only stimulated one's curiosity, as have profoundly changed one's beliefs and attitudes, including increased spirituality, religious conversion or deconversion, and positive psychological change. Psychic experiences are reported to have sometimes saved the experiencer from danger, or conversely, informed him/her about a loved one in danger. These experiences may also help people cope with suffering and bereavement, bearing important therapeutic implications. Parapsychological research suggests that religious spiritual experiences cannot be completely reduced to psychological needs and motivations, even though they are deeply related to them. The presumed veracity of these experiences and the potential to transform people's lives and worldviews should be equally addressed by all scholars interested in the study of religion and spirituality. Thank you very much for your attention.